Voting is a fundamental component of democratic governance systems, and different countries have varying approaches to electoral participation. Some countries, like Australia, Belgium, Brazil, Peru and Greece, to name a few, enforce compulsory voting, requiring all eligible citizens to participate in elections. Others, like the United States, Canada, the United Kingdom, India, Norway and Japan, allow voluntary participation. In this video, we'll compare the outcomes of compulsory voting and voluntary voting systems in democratic countries, with a particular focus on economic success, political stability, and social experience. GDP per capita is a good measure of the economic success of a country. Let's look at the groups of countries categorized by compulsory electoral voting compared to countries categorized as non-compulsory or voluntary electoral voting. Compulsory voting countries like Australia, Belgium and Luxembourg enforce compulsory voting, all of which boast high GDP per capita figures. Australia, for instance, has a GDP per capita of approximately $68,000 in 2023. Similarly, Belgium and Luxembourg maintain robust GDPs per capita, the latter surpassing $125,000. There are several much smaller economies in the list though. Countries like Peru and Ecuador. Overall, average GDP per capita for the 10 nations we could source this information for the year 2021 is just over $34,000. In voluntary voting democracies like the United States, the UK, and Canada, GDP per capita figures are also strong. The United States sits around $76,000, while the UK has a lower figure of approximately $46,000, indicating some disparity. The average for the year 2021 for this list is a more impressive $48,690. While GDP per capita is high in both categories compared to the global average of just over $12,000 per year, voluntary voting countries have performed better in terms of economic development. For our list of compulsory voting countries, personal income tax ranges from practically nothing for low-income earners up to an average top rate of around 40%, with a corporate tax rate average at 26.3%. These countries tend to have progressive tax structures that finance robust social services. And to our list of voluntary voting countries, the personal tax rates again range from almost nothing to an average top rate of 42.4%. The average corporate tax rate of 22.6% suggests some benefits to businesses in these countries. Compulsory voting countries generally maintain higher taxes overall to support a broader social welfare state, which may enhance overall societal well-being. It comes at the cost of a higher total tax on economic participants on top of a debt burden as well. Unemployment, a crucial indicator of economic health and societal well-being, also plays a role in the discussions surrounding the different voting mandates. The unemployment rates for the countries in these two categories paints a starker contrast. In our compulsory voting countries, the average unemployment over the last decade is 8.7%. For our voluntary voting countries, the unemployment rate over the same period is much more palatable, 5.7%. This is a notable difference, and perhaps the largest distinguishing numeric we found in our research. As providing income values for the different categories here wouldn't help in any equitable manner due to the vastly different costs to live in each country. So we found the best way to demonstrate a fair comparison for how sufficient citizens' incomes are in each group would be to compare the median house price to median yearly income as a ratio. In our compulsory voting cohort, the median salary in each country varied wildly from just over $5,000 a year to nearly $77,000 a year. But the house prices varied in quite similar amounts, leading to a house price to income ratio of 12.99 to 1. For the voluntary voting group, we had a large range across these countries also. Here we see a much better house price to income ratio of only 9.86 to 1. This is the next most significant difference between the two groups. It's not all sunshine and rainbows though, as access to housing remains a significant concern in most of the developed world. Being as difficult as it is to get a metric for these groups to compare well-being and general life satisfaction, the best we can offer in terms of a comparison is a summarized opinion of all available data. Both groups have some high entries in the OECD's Better Life Index, with high marks in health, civic engagement and education. The World Happiness Report includes some high scorers from both groups, but it seems the voluntary group edges out the compulsory group slightly in this measure. The difference doesn't seem to be enough to contribute significantly to this comparison though. Again, this area is incredibly difficult to measure. There are obvious areas of division, dissatisfaction and instability in each group. We can mention a somewhat obvious trend flowing between the two groups though. Countries with compulsory voting tend to exhibit greater political stability. There are high levels of voter turnout, as expected, ensuring broad representation in government and reducing polarisation. This can also foster a sense of civic duty and solidarity, which can manifest as an us against them mentality between citizens and politicians. Voluntary voting systems all have a lower voter turnout, which can create more political instability or increased polarisation. Political instability in voluntary electoral voting systems tends to manifest in single-issue voting patterns, which can, and does, lead to gridlock and populist movements. This can erode social cohesion over time, as marginalised groups feel less represented in the political process. Compulsory voting tends to support the growth of minor parties as higher voter turnout, some of whom are reluctant. Includes those who may feel disillusioned with major parties or are happy to conduct what is referred to as a protest vote by deliberately voting for niche groups. This can cause an overrepresentation of non-governing ideological parties that disrupt normal governmental processes, or strange coalitions that dilute the authority and effectiveness of some governments. Voluntary voting systems, on the other hand, often lead to a concentration of power among major parties. This makes for more unhindered governments at the expense of as much choice for voters. When comparing compulsory and voluntary voting systems, countries with compulsory voting tend to exhibit greater political stability, broader social cohesion, and more inclusive representation. Economically, both systems produce high levels of success, but compulsory voting countries generally have stronger welfare systems supported by higher taxes. This likely explains the higher unemployment rates in the compulsory voting groups. Voluntary voting systems may offer more flexibility in tax structures and housing affordability, but are more prone to political polarisation and the fragmentation of society. In terms of political diversity, compulsory voting supports a wider array of political parties, while voluntary systems favour major party dominance. Ultimately, compulsory voting appears to produce better outcomes in terms of political stability, social cohesion, and overall life satisfaction, while voluntary systems excel in economic flexibility and lower tax burdens. However, the trade-off suggests that compulsory voting may create a more balanced and equitable society. We can conclude that making voting mandatory makes the political class more likely to build up social welfare systems to make any potential government more attractive to more people. But this comes at the expense of individuals and corporations who can be taxed higher, but still have the same voting power as people on the lower end of the socio-economic ladder. Voluntary voting, on the other hand, seems to promote fuller employment, higher GDP per capita, lower house prices. But this all comes at the expense of social cohesion. It appears that political parties in this group can be more targeted in their governance ideology and perhaps can be more effective in broader policy decisions by only needing to consider the engaged voting cohort in their country. So, which approach do you think is a better idea for electoral voting rules? Thanks for watching.